As psychedelic medicines move toward more legalization and widespread cultural acceptance, questions regarding equity and access for people from diverse backgrounds remains an important focus. In this panel, the speakers will be sharing how personal experiences with intersectional identities have informed their work as psychedelic-assisted therapists and researchers. Through sharing personal narratives as well as examples from clinical research settings involving therapy with MDMA, psilocybin, and ketamine, they will explore the role of the therapist in holding space for individuals from non-dominant groups, such as those who may identify as queer, BIPOC, and other marginalized identities. They will then invite reflection and shares from the audience regarding how your intersectional identities have influenced your experiences with psychedelics and in psychedelic spaces. A brief introduction to our speakers. First, Dr. Andrea Rosati, MD, PhD, uses she and they pronouns. She is a board-certified psychiatrist and assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, an attending inpatient psychiatrist at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, and has served as a sub-investigator, study physician, and study therapist for MAPS Phase 2 and 3 trials of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. She is also a psychiatrist specializing in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy at Polaris Insight Center in San Francisco. She holds a PhD in developmental psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, where she was a researcher on the development of the theory of mind in childhood. Next, we have Dr. Christopher, MD, uses he and they pronouns. He is a dual board certified in psychiatry and addiction medicine and is an assistant professor of psychiatry at the Oregon Health and Science University and a physician scientist at the Portland VA Medical Center. He specializes in the treatment of PTSD and substance use disorders in both veterans and LGBTQIA+ populations. He has served as a co-investigator and study therapist for a trial of psilocybin-assisted group therapy for demoralization in long-term AIDS survivors, and was a sub-investigator, study physician, and therapist for MAPS Phase 2 and 3 trials of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. He's developing the first trial of MDMA-assisted group therapy for veterans with PTSD and is dedicated to ensuring gender and sexual minorities are represented in psychedelic research. Next, we have Dr. Jennifer C. Jones, PhD, LCSW, who uses she and her pronouns. She co-founded the Rising Caps Collective with Aisha Mohammed to use expansive healing methods to address the traumatic legacies of colonization, slavery, and capitalism. Jennifer works with MAPS Public Benefit Corporation as a JEDI consultant and MAT training assistant. Since 1998, Jennifer has worked in therapy with individuals who identify as LGBTQA, transgender or gender non-binary, people of color, sex workers, substance users, experiencing class oppression, having a positive HIV status, and/or healing from interpersonal and societal traumas. She has served as the Chief DEI Officers of the Philadelphia Fight Community Health Centers, and a faculty member and executive director of the Gestalt Therapy Training Institute of Philadelphia. As a parent and someone who believes a just world is possible, Jennifer is committed to organizing across color lines, creating unity among poor and dispossessed people globally to fight for all of our economic human rights. And last, we have Dr. Joseph McCowan, PsyD, who uses he, him pronouns. Dr. Joseph McCowan is a licensed clinical psychologist working in Los Angeles as a therapist and supervisor in the MAPS-sponsored Phase 3 clinical trials of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. Joseph supports the MAPS MDMA therapy training program as an educator, curriculum developer, and trainer. Additionally, Joseph practices at the California Center for Psychedelic Therapy, where he provides ketamine-assisted therapy and psychedelic integration therapy. Joseph is deeply passionate about furthering education and awareness of the healing benefits of psychedelics and in working to improve mental health outcomes for historically underserved communities. So I'll allow our panelists to take it away. Welcome.
Thank you, Mia. So I'm Jennifer, and Joseph, Andrea, Chris, and I, when we got together to talk about what we would talk about with you today, we realized that, one, what we were interested in is really supporting everybody in thinking about the multiplicity of their identities. and how that shows up for them in the work that they do, in their healing that they do, and how it can show up when you're working with people in expanded states. And so we thought that before we could really invite each of you to share possibly parts of your identities, that we actually would want to share parts of ourselves. And so since none of us jumped up to go first, we decided we would do it alphabetically, so that meant we volunteered Andrea to go first.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yes, the shyest one goes first. So, hi everyone, I'm Andrea, and you must lift the microphone more closely. Thank you. In thinking about what I wanted to share today, I decided I wanted to talk about my experiences of feeling marginalized, my experiences of having a marginalized identity, as well as my experiences with my own queer identity and my experiences with psychedelics. So just to start, I'm the daughter of Kathy, granddaughter of Helen. I grew up in upstate New York on Iroquois land. The daughter of a single mother. My mother raised my sister and I with much help from my family because we had a hard time getting by and paying all the bills. So my aunts and my grandmother came in, and so from an early age, I think for me, salient was this identities of the privilege of economic status, and also the privilege of, or the lack of privilege of, this non-heteronormative nuclear family, kind of always feeling on the outside in that way. And for me and my family as well, I also always had a sense of my own queerness in terms of gender and sexual identity, but I knew that was not a place, this wasn't something that would be welcome in my family. It would just bring far too much shame in my family that was already struggling. So I dutifully tried to be straight for a while. And ended up, I was the first person in my family to go to college. I'd always wanted to be a doctor, but at college, I kind of took a look around at the pre-meds around me, and I felt like I really didn't fit in. And so even though I took all the pre-med classes, I did not pursue it any further than that, and didn't come back to medical school until many years later. And then also while I was in college, I had my first exposure to psychedelics, and I really do think it was life-changing. So it was the beginning of sophomore year. I had the same roommate as I'd had freshman year. And I was an anxious person, but my roommate came home from our summer break and said, "Hey, I tried LSD over the summer. I brought some back. Let's do some." And, coming fresh out of the war on drugs, I was like, "Are you sure? Am I going to be able to control the whole experience the whole time?" And she was like, "Yeah." Needless to say, I had a 12-hour panic attack and spent the next months and even years integrating that. But one thing I took from that was, the people around me in terms of, holding space for me. I mean, they were just kind of enjoying the LSD. And I kind of asked myself, why am I not enjoying this? What is it about me? What's the deal with all this anxiety and paranoia inside of me and the shame that was coming out? So I kind of vowed to do psychedelics until I was okay with them. So it took a couple of years, but I found some people that, to do them with that provided a, really calm, stable, supportive environment. And then, I was okay with it, and I thought, okay, great, I'm done with psychedelics, good, let's move on. In retrospect, I can see at that time, I also was able to find my, to come out and to feel comfort with who I was in terms of my sexuality and gender. It was a really life-changing time that I continued to integrate. So fast forwarding a little bit, making sure I'm not forgetting anything here. I'll come back to it if I do. But fast forwarding, I didn't come to psychedelics again until I applied to, in residency actually. Went to medical school in my late 30s. Came out to UCSF for residency, where there was a lot of interest in psychedelics. Chris was there. So Chris was in my program, And a lot of research interest. So I thought, maybe I should try this again. I wonder if I'm a different person now, and maybe it'll be a different experience. So I ended up, at graduation, I went to Peru and did an ayahuasca retreat, and it was phenomenal. And came home seeking more integration, and I ended up getting a guide that I worked with for a while. My guide was queer, and I must say, that allowed me to feel really safe. I felt completely free from judgment. I felt completely held in safety. I felt like I didn't have to explain anything. I didn't feel like I was, possibly going to be judged or objectified in any way. So it was a very powerful time, that work that I did. Ended up at the CPTR program at CIIS, which led me to complete the MAPS training, and then I got, fell into doing the MAPS work at UCSF. I just feel like the stars aligned, and I was, found this path personally and professionally. And that has led me to, to continuing to be able to do this work. And I think in each of these contexts that I've gone through, I think I've been one of the only out queer women. I mean, even in my med school class, it was over 150 people. I think there were 2 out queer women or something. And so, and in terms of doing this work, just reflecting on the latest study that we completed, I think at least half of our participants were of one or more marginalized identities. So I hope that I can be of service in bringing that experience and bringing humility and sensitivity to the folks that I work with.
I guess, first of all, I think just the lack of preparedness that I've done for today reflects just the trust that I have in all of you. Because I usually over-prepare, and that's, I think, part of my story. But I'm originally from Utah. I think, a big piece of my story is having access to white privilege, having access to male privilege. And I grew up in a suburb of Salt Lake City. My family kind of had a history in Mormonism, but by the time I was born, that wasn't being practiced. But all of my neighbors, all of my teachers, all of my classmates were Mormon. And so I learned from a pretty young age just to pretend like I was Mormon, and kind of started to develop this chameleon part of myself that just fit in. Otherwise, I would get asked to go to church by people's families, and that started to get time-consuming. So I think by the time I was in high school, I think I had the sort of chameleon piece down, but I came out and I realized I could come out to some people and not to everyone, and it was, come out to the people who it was safe to come out to. And I think the monoculture of Utah was tricky because it wasn't kind of aggressively anti-gay. It was shrouded in love. It was, if you're different than us, you can't go to heaven with us, so we need to fix you, and we love you, and we want you to be okay. And so it was almost more insidious than if the culture just kind of kicked you out and said, get out of here. And so I had to navigate that, but I think what helped me was I discovered theater. Anybody who knows me knows that I really value my history in theater. And so I think that was my first foray into healing within groups, learning to build group cohesion, learning how to trust people and, co-create something together and be able to show that to other people and get feedback back. And so it was, honing emotions and all these different things that I needed. It was kind of like boot camp in a therapeutic way for me. And I went into theater in college as well. And then in college, my last semester, I took a drugs and behavior class. And I remember I did my project on ketamine, and I was like, this sounds really interesting. But it wasn't until many, many years later that I had an experience with that. My first psychedelic experience with psilocybin, it was shortly after that I decided I was going to go to medical school. And I had no mentorship, no one guiding me to navigate that process. No one sort of suggesting it. It just seemed to kind of come out of taking this drugs and behavior class, and I had to go back and do pre-med classes. But looking back, there are so many points where psychedelic experiences sort of made major pivots in my career path. And so I ended up getting into medical school, did not fit in, did not feel like it was a place where I thrived. But now, sort of being connected into the psychedelic therapy world, and especially queering psychedelics, like it just feels very similar to my theater days, where people value authenticity and presence, and I think a big part of our work is just being present and authentic with people. And so, yeah, I think in my current work with psychedelics, I definitely draw more on my theater background than I do on my psychiatry training. Maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
I, of course, wanted you to go on longer, so I didn't have to start. But like Chris, I actually think I first really started to find myself in high school in the theater realm. I think I'd been kicked out of a lot of groups growing up, just always seeming on the outside, but theater was a place where I actually found a sense of home and a sense of myself. And then in college, very much drew myself again towards people who were already starting to buddingly know that they were queer. Throughout my education, had decided that that's what was important to me, was creating inclusive places, and places where people like me and people like the people that I loved could feel welcomed. And as somebody who grew up multiracial and Black and a cisgender woman who definitely, I think, knew I was kind of on the outside, and very clearly in college was aware I was queer, and now 52, and a parent of a teenager, I realized that so much of my life, the work that I've done, has been about queering space and queering life. And so fast forward to 2019, and I actually started trying psychedelics actually when I was in college, but really mainly did them without really totally knowing the benefits and really knowing all that could be done. And I think I was very aware in college and in my early career as a psychotherapist, I was a clinical social worker, that I had a queer identity, and I also knew that I had a Black identity. But I think I always saw it from this perspective of advocacy and to create justice in the places that I was at. And in 2019, when I was lucky enough to be asked by the person who I collaborate with now, Aisha Muhammad, if I knew anybody, any Black, or not just Black folks, but BIPOC people who would be interested in learning about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And I immediately thought to myself, me. And the two of us applied, and we were able to be trained by MAPS Public Benefit Corporation to learn about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. From there, I just started learning more about the healing properties of expanded states, learning about ketamine and cannabis, and I knew that this was something that needed to be, people needed to feel included, they needed to feel welcomed, that we needed to expand who was getting access to this healing work. And I also knew that, just like as a therapist, I have to learn how to do the work myself, and I have to work on myself. And so I started finding opportunities to be expanded. And in that work, what became clear to me was that I had really been pretty dissociated from this racially traumatized part of myself, that all of the work I was doing to make sure everybody was feeling included, to make sure that everybody would feel welcomed, wasn't really taking into account fully how much I had been experiencing over the years. And so in the medicine space with someone who didn't fit the same racial background as I did, I had a moment of realizing that there was this place where I held not only the feeling of being victimized, but also holding parts of myself that were also the victimizer. And so I had this moment of saying to my guide, it's hard to be both the slave and the slave holder. And she sat in silence and didn't really have anything to say and never brought it back to integration. And so I had to try to metabolize this very painful, very heavy piece inside myself of the internalized pain that and oppression within me that I think not any of us could actually live in our society and not have internalized some of the hate that comes our way. And I realized it's important to have people in expanded states who actually are thinking about these things, who are thinking about the multiplicity of their identities, that are thinking about the ways in which social location might show up in the expanded space, and that actually we do a disservice to people if we can't meet them when those places show up. And so for me, it's felt really important to make sure that when we're talking about working with people with psychedelics, that we're thinking about how social location, how oppression shows up, and how the interplay of our identities, both the people who are holding the space for people and working with them potentially therapeutically, or just holding the space for them, and the people who are expanded, how those identities interplay. And so I'm really excited about this conversation, so thank you.
Thank you all. Extra loud mic. As you shared, Chris, it's no preparation is needed when you feel so comfortable with the folks you're with, and I mean that includes not just who is up here on the stage, but who I see in this room, and the folks that I know and those I don't. I just very much feel held and seen, and that's really part of my story, and what I'll be sharing is many of my teachers and teachings that have helped me lean in and embrace myself in my fullness and complexity. I guess I'd just like to refer to some of my mentors, some of them animistic and otherwise, those inanimate. Interestingly enough, as I reviewed this, like most of them start with P or have P in them. I'm going to refer to my POC and queer community. There's actually a number of folks here who I feel very connected to and have been really powerful supports over the years. I'll speak to that in a moment. Psilocybin specifically, but psychedelics in general. Psychotherapy, which I've only been in on 2 different occasions for a couple of years at a time, one with a white therapist when I was in high school, and then I saw a black therapist when I was in college, and I'll share a little bit about the power of that. And also, my brother Justin, whose middle name was Paul, and so we called him JP some of the time. My nephew is actually now named JP, who was born just a couple years following Justin's passing. So I guess where to begin with the power of these teachers? Really just, and sorry, the last P was personal story. Connecting with my personal story has been one of my most powerful teachers. So I'm gonna just combine the psychedelic psilocybin and psychotherapy experience, which I had, which were kind of synergistically occurring for me at the same time when I was in college at UC Santa Barbara. Struggling with multiracial identity and not really, not feeling like I fit in a lot of spaces. And, really just navigating that. I was very shy and anxious and, very much confused as to who I was. Someone with, my mom identifies as Italian American, my dad African American, and I hadn't really ever felt seen by someone who was supporting me until I had an experience with a black therapist in my college years whose focus specifically was on identity-related challenges and experiences, especially with like young black males. And it was the combination of that work as well as my experiences with psilocybin, which is another thing that I named that I studied in college, not in class, but just through experiences. And I was also studying what we called Black studies at UCSB, like Pan-African studies, just like the impact of and the history of the African diaspora across the world, and it helped me connect with my Black identity more. And one thing my dad had shared when I was younger, which didn't really land for me for a while, is like, you're always going to be Black to the world, because you're like, you may have white in you, but the world's never going to see you as that. and I've found that to be the case over the course of many experiences throughout my life. But just I use all of that, the wisdom of those experiences, my psychedelic, my personal experiences in psychotherapy, as well as my interest in history and studying American history and otherwise when it comes to the African diaspora, has really helped support a discovery of who I am and my own story and my ancestry and lineage and the history of oppression for Black folks and just folks in general that experienced, that have one or more marginalized identities. I can go very deep into all of these things, but I do want to be mindful of time. This really was the process of me leaning into wanting to be a psychedelic-assisted therapist, which, at the time, and this is in, the mid-2000s, I'm like, okay, I see this on the horizon, and hopefully one day it will come around. Didn't think it would happen as quickly as it has, but it has, and it's been wonderful to help support that. But really, more than anything, I've been supported by and learned from the folks that I've encountered, in these spaces and doing this work. Mostly I was trained where Jennifer was trained in 2019 in Louisville, Kentucky, and others who are here that I can actually see, like Aisha and a bunch of folks I saw last night. And that community, mostly queer folks in the psychedelic space as well as people of color. It was a training map specifically developed for trainees of color. I actually had two options that year when I was seeking training. One was a traditional training in Colorado, which, when they gave me the two options. I was like, okay, if there's a POC training and then there's this other training, I think I know what that other training looks like and feels like. And so I chose the POC training. And in my years in academia and just like in even going back to undergrad, like I've operated in mostly white spaces. And in the psychedelic space, as I was desired to network in this space and just connect and build community, it had been mostly white spaces. And the experience in a space that was diverse and inclusive and representative of really all of us who we are. It invited us all, or I mean, at least I felt, to like lean in. I learned so much about myself and how to show up from what I witnessed in terms of how folks were showing up in that space. It wasn't just an MDMA assisted therapy training. It was a, we, like front and center were conversations about like intersectional identity and intergenerational and racial trauma and systems of oppression and equity and inequity and how we can help support the underserved and marginalized folks in connecting with or reconnecting with these medicines and treatments. And that has just powerfully shifted, it powerfully shifted my career. It really helped me see myself in this space in ways that I hadn't. It really helped me find my voice, and I don't have that voice without that, without the community. I don't feel that safety or connection without that group who, literally in that training, we started facing a lectern on the first day with someone providing a presentation, and by the end of it, we had collectively just over the course of the week formed into it was just a circular space where we were all sitting on the ground, the chairs were gone, and there was an altar in the middle of the room, I carry that with me and into every space or relationship or experience that I have. I do want to speak to my brother, Justin. Justin was my greatest teacher. Justin had what's called Down syndrome in medical terms. And 8 years ago, he passed unexpectedly. Justin, he carried a pride. It's a pride I haven't seen anyone else possess or embody. He would actually name, that he was different, and anytime I had a question about anything related to my own identity or feeling like I was the odd person out or anything, he'd respond and say, Joseph, it's you're different, just like me. It's okay. That's and he just had a really powerful wisdom and presence and energy and just embraced everything about himself and everyone else. Just, always had just a beautiful smile. And like, he was the most consistent person that I've ever known. And super, like, independent. But yeah, and he taught me everything. And I didn't always realize this until a lot of it I just like kind of like washed over me when he passed. But everything that the ways in which I show up as a therapist, just seeing things from others' perspectives, like embracing others with regards to who they are. Like, I realize like slow is my favorite speed in any space. Like, I also, like, he also taught me that, like, just being present. He taught me how to be present and humble and available, and to just like, to be able to go at another's pace and to just go with the process and just trust them unfolding. Yeah, and I just want to really, I feel him here in this space, like, in his energy here with all of you. Because, like, yeah, his soul, like, is just in these types of spaces and communities. And so thank you for holding him and us, because he is here.
We're so grateful. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just really moved, so thank you, Joseph. We're just really grateful that each of you were willing to hear our stories, and we're really curious about the ways in which hearing the multiplicity of our identities and how we're holding them and bringing them forward to you, how that might be bringing up thoughts that you might have about the multiplicity of your identities, and if it maybe has even made you think about your identities in more expansive ways. And so we would love to hear from any of you who would be willing to share around what comes up for you and what comes up for you in if you've been doing expansive work or even just thinking about your identities. Were there other questions that you would like people to think about?
I feel like that's probably a good place to start, just an invitation, and then we can go from there.
Do we need these?
Anyone interested in sharing?
I'm just pulling the mic for whoever. Yeah.
Well, I'm really interested in how my identity as a witch, which I've held since I was about 19 years old as an act of rebellion, how through the expansion and the assimilation of psychedelics into mainstream culture, how the identity of witch is changing. I mean, so that's something that I'm very curious about. It's also very interesting for me to see people take on that identity without really knowing much about its history, and of course the poison path, right? And I've just recently been thinking, even though I've been a thought leader in the ecosexual movement for some time, I just recently really deeply understood that it is nature, or Gaia, who's psychedelic, and who's emanating all of this deep wisdom and reaching out to us in this way. So I'm wondering how, can we not be human anymore? Is there a different identity that we could have that's more expanded, that's more just different? You know, I think that's part of the call towards evolution that we're currently in the middle of, right? There's a call towards extinction, and there's a call towards evolution simultaneously. So I'm interested in those kind of entangled, embedded, messy identity relationship things. Those are the things that are interesting to me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your presentation and for your question. I think something that came up to me was something that another speaker said is the ways they minimize themselves. And I think that resonated with me. You know, growing up, I was like, I'm just a white guy, just another white guy. And how that sort of fueled a search for another identity of like, oh, I'm Jewish. Okay, let me like tap into that. Or then becoming a nurse and being like, okay, I'm a nurse. Oh, I'm drawn to the feminine. What does that mean? And I think it's only recently that sort of coming to integrate those different identities and sort of now the term of intersectionality and realizing, okay, I'm all of these things and I'm not any one of these things, and different parts show up in different situations, or if I'm feeling that one of them is more needed by someone else around me. So I think that's something that intersectionality has been really a wonderful way of realizing, like, no, I don't have to pick one of these things. I'm all of these things, and I don't have to be any of these things at any given time.
Okay. Thank you to the panel. It's good to see Joe and Andrea again and the panel. You know, as I think of identity and when the medicines show up for me and they start to pull me into the oneness, and then I start to lose this concept of identity, and then I'm there in that space, in that expansion, and then where's identity and how loose is it? And then I start to come back, and then identity reforms, and then I start to like question, like, is identity a farce? And I just find this a very, I just find this for me a very kind of complex and somewhat troubling, but in a good way. Concept, and I'm so glad to be in this queer psychedelic space, because I am definitely queer. I definitely identify with that. But I mean, for me, the medicines drag me to a place where that doesn't matter anymore, and then reforms it into a place where it definitely does. And I would love to hear if anyone else has had that like experience. Anyway, thanks.
If I may just, Eric, if it would be okay if I just offer a response to that. It reminds me, one of the discussions in the book, one of the chapters in the book, I think it was the chapter by Courtney Watson and Emma Knighton, talking about, there's this narrative around psychedelics, like, psychedelics will bring us all to unity or something. But in that like unity, there's an erasure of identity. And so, it seems that, maybe you're speaking to that. And, the actual, there's some value, there's some meaning in getting to know the complexities of that space rather than just disowning them, really.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if I may, and appreciate what you're asking and sharing and just being vulnerable and sharing it with us all, your experience. We titled this panel Through the Prism, and prisms represent many things, but kind of for, and I think represent different things for each of us. But one of the reflections was the ways in which, in both directions, like the, there's like one light, right, or like it looked like one thing, hits the prism, and then it, bursts into its complexity. And in the other direction, it's, if you're kind of reversing it, it's like the complexity can, be back into what it showed up as, right? Or it's just like that one light. And I feel like psychedelics can really, or I mean, any sort of really powerful experience, especially with regards to identity, can help us see both, right? Like, help us see that one is complex and that the complex is also in the one. But it's important to appreciate that there's the complexity always. And, we each have that. And to reduce it to just, what it shows up as before it hits the prism, rather than recognizing what it is in its full spectrum and full color and complexity, is to we're not seeing it fully. And so, yeah, we are one and we are many, all at the same time.
I just want to say thank you. I'm all the way up here. Thank you to all the panelists. Just thinking about, I really appreciate this question of identity, and perhaps looking at my own story. I early on used to identify with being a woman, and then identifying with being queer, and that sort of marginalized position there, and then waking up to this, after taking this sacred lineage class at CIS, which helped me to see my whole lineage is colonizer, and this white body that I walk in, and so just sort of looking at the privileges that I walk around with, even as this white woman who is identified as a lesbian, as queer, and just looking at, really diving into that, those social categories today, and what does that mean in the psychedelic space for me during the journey, but then also what does that mean for me walking in my life, in the world, outside of journeying. And if I'm going to dive into it, really, it isn't about self-flagellation for the performance of it, but it's really for looking at the fact that I walk with this ancestry and carrying that. What does that mean? How does that inform me? And it's powerful, it's strong, and it just informs a lot of how I think and how I behave, and having to uncondition and undo that work that is generations, like back to the Mayflower. I can track all the way back. And then even before the Mayflower, we came from another Christianized country in Norway. So it's just like so many generations back of this body and DNA and history that is a colonizer. So just sitting with that is, that's part of my identity. It's a big part of it. So anyway, thank you for this question.
Sure. This is very special treatment, the whole microphone holding. This is I like this a lot. You're doing a great job. It's like concierge microphone service. Okay. So I am struck by the conversation around unity and multiplicity. And for my own identity, I find the work that I've done in psychedelics, the self-healing and self-work and self-exploration I've done with psychedelics, it for me has been less around unity and more around harmony, allowing all of my identities their own voice, and then bringing those voices together. Jennifer, I was struck when you talked about being multiracial. My maternal lineage is German from Germany, so not even American Germans, but the German Germans who did all the things that the German Germans did. Just wreaked havoc on the 20th century. Thank you, Germany. And then my paternal lineage is African. So one of the first sort of realizations that came out of psychedelic work for me was being of the oppressor and of the oppressed, and having these two be very strong voices, and getting them into a conversation with each other inside myself. And if I can do that inside myself, if we could do that inside of ourselves, then we can get into a conversation outside of ourselves. So I find that holding all of the multiplicity of my identity and bringing it into harmony through psychedelic experience has just been phenomenal for me, being able to hear myself and then also to hear others. So thank you so much for speaking to this topic.
Okay. Thank you all so much for being here and offering us your wisdom. I'm into words. I think words matter. And just yesterday, my dear friend Jay Sevelius introduced me to this new to me term, gender expansive, as an umbrella term. And she unpacked it a little bit, and I thought, wow. And so I'd just like to take the opportunity to hear from any of you your thoughts on this term, gender expansive, the usefulness of it, the limits of it, anything at all. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we are starting to develop language that describes who we are and how we feel, rather than taking existing language and trying to fit into it. And so I think, yeah, gender expansive, gender diverse. I've heard lots of different terms to describe this, and I feel like the language is evolving, and it's evolving rapidly, and I think it's really exciting. There's also a backlash, that we need to be aware of. I think over 200 anti-trans bills across the country. So it's serious. It's a serious backlash. But it's also, I think, liberating to have these new terms and new languages to describe more nuance and not have it just be binary.
I think you said it. I could restate it, but I think you said it.
I would just add there was an amazing discussion on gender expansiveness earlier today with Rachel and Steve, I believe. That was so inspiring. Just wowed by everyone who shared their stories. So, yeah, I'm really grateful for them for leading that session and everyone who shared.
Yeah, my sense is that we hopefully are evolving to actually be expanded in terms of constructs of identity, so that it isn't just a normative identity that's been put forward that is put as the standard for how everybody's supposed to fit in. And I think that there's an expansion happening, hopefully, though there is major backlash, to really allow for all kinds of identities to come forward and to have those identities be spoken, which is why I think this can be a powerful space, inviting everybody to really start to look at the multiplicity of their identities, because what the narratives and the stories that have been out there have been pretty limiting, and fitting into very specific boxes when we know that there's a multitude of stories. There's a different story for each individual in the room. And the reality is we can hold it all. We don't have to actually have people fit into categories. We can actually have people have all of the identities that they carry, and make space for that.
Yeah, agreed. Expanding, evolving in all the ways, hopefully. I often feel that if we look at just like collective movements over the years and or just even at our current moment, like I feel like movements for social justice and health equity and BIPOC rights and trans rights, queer rights, and the psychedelic renaissance are not like separate. They're one and the same, right? It's really all about it. We're all desiring to be seen and to be appreciated in any way that we show up with regards to whatever we do, and seen our complexity, to be allowed the space to be ourselves. It's all about our human rights. It's our rights to be expressive in any ways that we desire. Right, currently we may see, it's like I guess in the psychedelic renaissance, it's really a psychedelic research renaissance, right? Like, that's really what's come back. But what we'll hopefully begin to see is that we're also seeing new like cultures and communities evolve and have these experiences in any way that they desire to have them, and build community and culture around these with these medicines and folks holding and healing each other in any ways that they desire. Currently, it's like we have the above ground and the underground. It kind of feels like a binary, but again, hopefully that's a binary that bursts into much more. And so, like, another area of expansiveness I hope to see in the future, and I feel we will, especially with like once you remove criminalization, and I mean, especially once we're at the level of legalization, it's that's another opportunity for folks to just be, right, and just show up. And
yeah, as long as we can figure out how to make it accessible to everybody, which is, I think, our
true as
biggest challenge next.
For sure.
So I think you're right, and I think the challenge for all of us is figuring out how are we going to make sure it gets to everybody who wants it.
No doubt.
I just want to speak a little bit on the differences of inherited identities versus created identities. And I think one of the reasons why I'm here, why many of us are here, is who am I and what am I supposed to be doing with my time on this planet, this existence? And so the prequel to my story is that my father's side are all refugees from North Korea, and that family history I don't take lightly, because I know that I wouldn't be here if there wasn't that moment of risk taken when my grandfather and my aunts and uncles all decided to flee from the 38th parallel, live as refugees in South Korea, eventually emigrate to the US. So I know that's just part of my history. And also speaking on gender, I'm really thankful for the kids, the younger folks who've created these new gender expansive terms and language, things that I so deeply resonate with but didn't have the words for growing up. Kind of growing up pre-internet age as I was entering into high school. And so those are some of the identities that I feel that are just what I am, right? I'm composed of those things. But I'm also a visual artist, I'm a professor of the arts, and for a couple of years, one of my biggest personal challenges was both of my parents and my grandparents all coming down with very serious cancers at the same time. So there was a maybe 7-year period where I was working as a caretaker for both my parents, my grandparents, and then eventually, after they passed, one of my best friends lost their child to suicide, and someone who used to help me in my art studio. And so I was the first person they called. It's like, oh my God, this happened. Can you come over? And sort of kind of life thrust me into this sort of death doula role or caretaker role for them. And so then through that experience, I started to identify as a caretaker. And so that I kind of embrace as an identity. And I think a lot of the work that other people are doing in this room really resonate for me, because it's about that, how are we present, for other people through our own lived experiences. And it is really powerful when you have a therapist or a guide that looks like you or has some shared lived experience, whether it's a queer experience, a racialized experience, an immigrant experience, whatever, because then you don't feel like you're starting at -10, where you have to educate the person that's supposed to be there for you. You can at least start at 0 and kind of build from there. So I'm really thankful that these conversations are kind of destigmatized, and that we're able to explore all of our identities and learn from each other. And I was in that first session about the gender expansiveness, which just like blew my mind, of just the diversity of experiences, but the openness and the vulnerability that people shared. And that's what I feel like I want to be a part of. And as a visual artist as well, the possibilities of psychedelics, not just as a sort of Western pathological solution, but as a shared communal co-creating experience, as a kind of performance and ritual, something that can build community, explore things really joyously and create pleasure, is so important. And just a real quick share that's relevant to this conference is that I'm friends with Alex Belzer. It's how I found out about it, started reading, devouring the book, really, just really loved all the contributions. And I decided to have a mushroom self-guided trip where I was going to really look at myself and really examine myself head to toe, especially as I appear androgynous or other genders to other people, and I've always dealt with that in my life. And so I had a really deep look at myself on mushrooms, having the foregrounding of all of these stories and sort of other experiences that were written about in the book. So I felt like I was really primed. And so I was looking at myself and able to really just appreciate my own unique physical beauty, my internal beauty, reflecting on past lovers, current lovers, future lovers, and just being really thankful for being able to enjoy so much pleasure through my unique identity, and being unafraid to assert that more in the world as structures are trying to shut us down and diminish us, because we are very powerful and we act as a bridge to so many different communities. And I think people are afraid of that power because of how that might disrupt other kinds of economic or political agendas. So I'm just really happy to be in this room with you all. Just so many powerful stories, so many amazing people. And I want to, as much as we can heal from our traumas, really revel in our joy and pleasure as well.
Hi. So it's just so lovely to see the 4 of you up there. I felt incredibly touched hearing each of your stories. I know and love each of you, and just getting to hear these different aspects of you filled my heart. And I also felt a deep sense of resonance with certain pieces. In particular, Jennifer, you talked about the ways in which feeling different and not belonging inspired you to create spaces that were inclusive and accessible. I feel that deeply, and has been an important part of my life. I also really resonated with what you were saying, and someone else down here as well, about the oppressor and the oppressed living within us and contending with that polarity. And it made me think about how, the potential for us as we move towards creating more inclusive spaces and accessible spaces, also if we don't do the work of integrating the oppressor and the oppressed, owning the oppressor within us, can continue to perpetuate the divisiveness and the oppressive and exclusive tendencies that kind of harmed us to begin with. And so, I guess I'm making a comment around that, but I would also love to hear any of your thoughts around how we can, avoid perpetuating the very systems that harmed us in the first place as we move towards trying to create greater inclusivity.
Hi. I don't know if you want to talk. Although in the back. Hi. Hello. So I am a fourth generation Japanese American. I found it a really interesting time to be of the Asian diaspora. I think we're really just in the last few years been able to find community around what it means to be Asian American. We're just now seeing queer Asian stories in the past few years. Part of me feels very jealous when I hear a story like yours, Joseph, where your father is able to tell you how you're going to be perceived in the world, whether or not that's what you wanted to hear in the moment. Because my family, because they went through internment and had their land stolen from them, they found survival through complete assimilation. And psychedelics have really helped me understand why they had to make that choice and help me empathize with them. And when I think about intersectional identity, it's really freeing for me in so many ways. So many of the things that I felt like I was growing up were such contradictions to each other. Sorry, I'm super nervous. I just wanted to say, I really appreciated hearing what everyone had to say. And also, I was curious, Chris. So I was a music major. I make performing my whole life, and I was really curious about how your experience with theater. You say that was a more contributing factor than some of your other much more, traditional psychological training, and I was curious about if you could expand on that and how that really affected you.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks for talking about your story. That's really, really powerful, and yeah, I'm just curious how many people have had some sort of dabbling in the performance arts of some kind. Yeah, I think there's some good overlap. And I think, for me, I think when I learned the MAPS model and we started doing training for the MAPS model, I was like, whoa, this is so much like improv and aspects of improv and other things, a lot of yes and. Whereas my psychiatry training, first and foremost when I entered into internship was taking people to court so I could hold them in the hospital against their will and give them medications against their will. Yeah, and so that was my kind of entry into the mental health field. And it was that same year that I discovered MAPS, and I was like, this is more familiar to me, and it's cool to see the data showing that it's helpful, because it makes a lot more sense to me. And so I love that we work as co-therapy dyads, and we're even when we're working with an individual, it's a small group. And I think there's an emphasis on this model to really level the playing field, that the person you're working with is the expert in their own trauma and what it is that they need in order to heal. And so it really does feel like you're co-creating this narrative and story together, and you're really listening to your scene partner and playing off of them, and that really it does kind of emerge from creating safety and trust and bringing authenticity. And so I think that's what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, just to build on what Chris is saying, the word trust is actually in my mind as I'm listening to everyone's beautiful shares and questions. So I'm thinking of the definitions of trauma as a betrayal of trust. I know that Van der Kolk has written about that, and Winnicott, the psychoanalyst, talked about breach in trust, and hence the need for a holding environment, which I think that's what we're talking about here, is like, to what extent can we hold each other with care and with clarity to bring trust back, to to create that space for a person to do their healing, to do their searching. And Genesee, I was thinking about your question, like, how do we own the oppressor in us? I think bringing that inquiry, and being able to ask ourselves questions and see it within us. That is how we get to know our internal landscape. That is how we come to be able to trust ourselves and to be able to offer ourselves clearly and carefully for others. And just one more thing I wanted to come back to. Terry, I think you had brought up nature, and I just bringing nature into this, because nature is kind of like the ultimate trustworthy container. And so thanks for bringing that in. And I just wanted to share one little story about my experiences with nature and psychedelics. So the nature as a setting, I have found when I am working in settings like this one, this kind of urban setting, I have found that, like, what comes up for me is prayers for nature, right? Prayers for the earth, prayers for us, But when I have worked in a very vibrant setting, not around here, nature's like, you don't need to pray for me. Pray for yourselves. Like, just the vibrancy of nature kind of coming through and being a part of our healing as we're a part of healing for each other in the ways that we hold space. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Andrea. And just following up on that, after hearing your question, Genesee, and from what you both are sharing, there's a lot coming up for me. Genesee, I think part of what you're referring to is doing our own work in an ongoing way, and the power of like how that helps supports the ways in which we show up for others and hold space for others. And Chris, you named like what kind of shifted for you when you started the process of engaging with like psychedelic-assisted therapy, and that too was like really transformative for me, just coming into this work. Let's just say I was trained very differently than kind of how I've been, I guess the type of support models we have in psychedelic-assisted therapy. I guess outside of what I really loved from my training, I did have one supervisor who was very like humanistic, and that kind of like landed for me, and that's kind of what I carried forward mostly from my training. But I feel in psychedelic-assisted therapy, it's always this like parallel process for myself, and I feel it with my co-therapists and also the participant, as we call them in the research. And also just like in therapy with clients, I feel this as well. Like there's a process of like seeing and being seen, and I just have so much respect for their courage and vulnerability and coming in and entering and opening and trusting, and so it just really is a reminder always for me to continue the work that I'm doing, and also just to like be vulnerable in ways that are helpful, right? So it isn't always helpful to kind of like, I guess, without going into it, but there's always an energetic dynamic in these spaces, and the ways we hold them is so important for the safety and the trust to evolve in the relationships that we have. And it's like their preparation is not just education on what to do. It's like we're preparing ourselves as therapists to hold space for them. It's not just their preparation; it's our preparation. The journey is not just theirs; it's ours. And when the integration is not just theirs. We're integrating as well and learning. And that's just, the work is ongoing work. And like, one thing that I've loved about this work is it allows people, for the most part. I mean, research can be pretty rigid in some ways, but in terms of our therapeutic model, it's pretty flexible and open in how people show up and what unfolds. And so, yeah, like, welcoming any parts that are emerging and just allowing that to be there. One of our mottos is like trusting the process. Just welcoming anything that's oncoming, emotions, feelings, sensations, really looking inward. And then there's also that process of ourselves, like our own embodied and somatic awareness during the sessions as well as outside of them. Like, we're encouraging that for them, but it's like I'm always mindful of not like, preaching things that I'm not practicing always lands for me as like very ridiculous. And so it's always a helpful reminder for me when I'm doing this work to just continue doing my own work. And yeah, it's been so powerful the ways in which I've seen folks show up and that sometimes they even name like how it feels different when we're just open and spacious, rather than taking up space, when we're really really giving time for the relationship to build and evolve. And I mean, even just like long sessions are sometimes expansive for folks. And yeah, obviously psychedelics can help support a lot of this, but the model itself can be very powerful for our participants and clients and for us ourselves in our own growth and healing.
I just wanted to also respond to your question, Genesee, because I actually really appreciated it, because for me right now, that's where my curiosity is a lot, is thinking about, I think often what I find whenever I'm doing kind of justice, equity, and diversity work is that we all go to our places of oppression, no matter what. And so we're very attached to those places where we've been injured. And it's much harder to look at the places that we hold that are potentially energy of a perpetrator, or energy of the colonizer, or the slaveholder, or the bully. And yet I think it's imperative, actually, that if we're gonna stop killing nature and killing each other, that we actually have to start looking at those pieces. And really holding ourselves with love and compassion in our complexity. Because if we keep only holding on to the places where we're oppressed and not looking at the places in which we're perpetrating violence and perpetrating harm, we're actually going to struggle to change, and we're going to have a hard time supporting other people being able to really fully embrace themselves and hold themselves with love in their complexity. So to me, I feel like that's a really key part of the gift that actually expanded states can give us, is to really be able to look at ourselves from many, many dimensions. So thanks for asking that question. So I have to tell you that I feel like I'm in an expanded state right now, and I have no idea how much time has passed. We have 5 minutes. What? We have 20 minutes. Oh, we have 20 minutes. Wow. This is even like a medicine space.
Hi, over here. So I've been wondering about this a lot for the last few years, as a person, as a person with clinical training who is not practicing as a clinician, and as a researcher too. From my experience and from my observation, we, in certain situations, and maybe more frequently than we think, we identify with our most vulnerable and most traumatized identities, kind of like what you, Jen, just said. We are very attached to our traumatized identities. And then, this is terrifying, by the way. Okay, so then when we internally we feel like that most vulnerable part. Often externally we are assessed as sort of most oppressive part, if that makes sense, right? Like we could identify as an abuse survivor, but we could, externally be a white person, therefore, right? And I can illustrate it with my friend's example recently, who is an Indian American male, and he had an interaction at work with a white woman, and I think from my understanding, from what he told me, like both parties felt wrong because the woman felt oppressed because he was male, and he felt oppressed because she was white, and he wasn't. And so I feel like when that happens, there's no capacity for dialogue and for connection. And I guess it's like $1 million question, but how do we not do that, or how we find the language to check in with that, with what that person is feeling internally, rather than just like judging externally? I hope this makes sense. Thank you.
I think I missed some pieces, and so I'm wondering if you might ask your question again.
Reword. Yeah, okay, so like if there is discrepancy between our most vulnerable identity, how we feel, and how we present, which maybe doesn't appear that vulnerable. How do we, and we often interact based on how we externally present other people. How do we not just like judge people and each other externally? Does it help? To communicate, to do something together, to build community and work together and help each other and heal.
So what I heard you say was, how do we hold people with compassion and not go to that place of judgment and anger and frustration when people say things or come from kind of presenting oppressive stances?
Maybe like even before they had a chance to actually say anything, or like even have a stance or express a stance.
So when we project onto somebody who holds an identity that we experience as oppressive, I think we welcome in all the feelings. I think we own the feelings of judgment that we're feeling, and I think we welcome in that part of ourselves that feels the anger, that feels the judgment. And when we welcome in those parts, when we actually acknowledge them, we don't necessarily have to choose to act on them, but we can actually hold them with compassion and say, yeah, of course you're here. And also be able to then decide what we need to do about it. Maybe we actually do need to have a conversation with that person and to check it out, like come with some curiosity about, I make up this story about you. I'm wondering if that's true. I realize something's coming up in me when I look at you. Like, I wish that weren't here between us. Like, can we talk about that? What's that like for you to hear me say that when I sit with you as like a cis man, like this is what comes up in me, or if I sit with you as a white person, or if I sit with you as this person from this nationality or this country, this is what comes up in me. And and then be able to speak from that place of like, both of you are holding that pain, actually. The reality of like, we represent these things to each other. So I don't know, that's one way. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, and agreed. Luca, you mentioned earlier, like, the dialogue between parts within, helping support, like how you show up outside of yourself, and this kind of was bringing me back to that a bit, like, there's both holding what's coming up for us, and then it's powerful if we're humble enough to step into dialogue within ourselves as well as outside of ourselves, and to just be present with what's there, and notice, and it's not like it's not like one is lacking courage in not doing either, but it's it's something that we can kind of just know is possible, and yeah, could potentially be an area of our work or growth in showing up in new ways internally as well as externally, relationally, collectively, societally.
Just to add to that, my experience anyway, and maybe it's true for you as well, is just sometimes stuff just kind of comes up involuntarily. And I just regard it as that's a product of living in this really traumatizing world. It's in me. So I try to be patient with myself, and again, as you're saying, bring kindness and compassion to that, and patience with myself as well. But this world is so traumatizing in a number of different ways, and whether we're on the side of, oppressor or oppressed of any given power divide, we all have multi-level complex trauma in us in various ways. And it's a lifetime's work to sit with it and sort it out as best we can.
Can I hold it? Hi, my name is Erica, right here. I just want to thank you for sharing your experience, showing up with so much love and authenticity. And I have a couple of questions for you. So I'm a queer Mexican-American woman. I'm currently in the CIS somatic therapy program. And I very much started this program because of a journey. I had a very clear sign. I was like, this is what I need to be doing, and I want to be doing. And so for someone who's going to go in the field, I'm just curious from the participants the POC participants, what are some of your resources? What have you called in to navigate a predominantly white environment? And then for the participants who are more European American presenting, I'm curious of what tools or how do you apply cultural humility, and how does that come up in your therapy room? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Great questions. One of them, this last one, if I'm hearing correctly, working with folks with BIPOC identities, what tools are being called in? Is that what I was hearing? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So from the practitioner perspective? Okay.
What do you do to support yourself?
Yeah. It's hard. One of the part of what I call in is just brutal honesty and realism around naming that and the systems that are there, and the challenges currently and that I've had historically in navigating them. And there's a lot of just, in my own experience, a lot of just resilience there. It's there's settings that I'm very familiar with, but I've also never felt comfortable in them. And I'm just it's just familiar discomfort at this point. But community is that's the biggest resource, more than anything. And that's what has helped support, that's what I wouldn't be where I am in this field. I don't even know if I'd be in this work without the community that I've found or connected with, coming in and has grown since.
Yeah, I would say I called in my Granny Jones, who's no longer with me, but she's with me. And then I call in my collaborator and other people of color, who I can talk to about this work. And then I call in people who want to be allied to this work. And as Joseph said, name it. And that certainly, when you name it, it certainly lets you know who wants to stick in the conversation with you or not. Because if people don't want to and they don't have to, they don't. But there are a lot of people who actually do want to be a part of the conversation. And so I think that when you name it, it offers them the opportunity to like start to be in that conversation. And it also then gives you an opportunity to feel like you can have your voice and bring all of yourself into the space. But I think it always is helpful to find other BIPOC people who you can lean on also, so that you can find that voice, so you can have that courage to say those things that are going to make potentially white people feel really uncomfortable. And then there are people who are going to stay in it, who are going to be like, this really sucks, this feels really uncomfortable, but I want to be here with you in it. And you just have to keep speaking up around it. And so, yeah. Thanks for the question. And then I didn't get the last part of your question that you had for Chris and Andrea.
Cultural humility in therapy. I think I say this a lot, but my favorite definition of humility is that we don't know what we don't know. And so even if I am sitting in front of a white, non-binary, cis male appearing person, holding sort of the experience with humility is being curious about what that person's experience is, because it's probably different than mine. And I think when I was in training, they called it cultural competence. And that's, data has now shown that is actually harmful and perpetuates bias, to say that I'm competent after having like one lecture on. And so, yeah, I think cultural humility is like an ongoing practice. It's an iterative practice. I keep learning from it. I make mistakes, and I keep trying to improve.
Yeah, and for me, if I'm in a situation where I think I have privilege or not, and maybe I do, again, bringing humility, trying to really listen, just kind of feel like, what does the situation feel like? Like, try to bring awareness to the interaction, and importantly, consultation with mentors and colleagues is really, really important to help me figure out what I might be missing, and how I can bring in support if I'm not going to be able to offer the support that this person needs.
Also, I think it's really important that like people in oppressed positions remember they need cultural humility too, because I make mistakes all the time, and it's really important for me to show up to them and to be able to have that humility to say, I'm going to mess up, and I want to learn from it, and I want to be accountable to it. But I think it's really important also that we remember that we all have the capacity to hurt people, to not see things, to overlook things, to have our biases. So I think that also making sure that we're all holding that cultural humility feels really key.
Yeah, and just to add to what has been pretty, I guess, a lot of what I would share. I often also think of like the inherent like power imbalances in, especially like a therapeutic research space, but let alone in just therapy in general, or in any relationship where there's, I just try to move towards like mutuality as much as possible, and it can be hard in some settings, but it is still like a process, and providing space, like wherever I can find it, right? Space for my own learning and growth, space for their voice, space for the development of trust and safety in the relationship, and not taking up too much space in the space.
Hi, on the back here. I first want to just start off thanking you all for doing the emotional and social labor of sharing your hearts and your journeys with us, and putting in all of the work, jumping through the academic hoops that it takes to unfortunately have the impact and voice and place at the table that is required to make these big changes in our consideration for all the various backgrounds and identities that actually exist within the world are important to acknowledge in this work. And I specifically want to thank Chris for giving me the opportunity to work within their lab and as a research assistant, and a lot of your journey definitely reminds me of things in my own past and my identity, and what you said specifically about shape-shifting and code switching for your own safety and having that be a learned way of functioning and surviving and feeling safe. I definitely, it resonates with me. It's definitely part of something I had to work through, that psychedelics were an integral part of working through that, because for me, I think all the energy that I was putting into code switching and reading the room and making sure that I was being appropriate for the social setting that I was in, growing up in the country to very religious family, having lived right on the edge of homelessness for many years, that was just definitely a comfort zone for me. And what some others have said also about getting addicted to having your identity be wrapped around your own pain is something that just takes a lot to work through, and it's hard to see that if you're looking outward all the time for your own safety. So yeah, I just really appreciate bringing that into the conversation, and how much we all are doing to those of us that have had the privilege to be able to work through a lot of that pain and work with the gifts that psychedelics have given us, and the perspective that is required to be able to release that placeholder, that pain that's sitting in your identity, and then start the process later on with building your identity. I just really appreciate the work that you're all doing for your various communities and backgrounds and people that you work with. That people being willing to help me, and your community being able to surround me with love and acceptance has really been the only way that I've been able to do that later in life identity formation. So I really appreciate people like all of you that are doing that work. So I just want to thank you all.
Thank you. I just want to say I was moved by your share, and it moved me to think about, I just felt this well of sadness come up for me around thinking about who isn't here and who isn't getting this healing. And so just being aware of the privilege that there is, and being able to do the work to do our own healing individually. And so I just would appreciate it if we all just took a minute to just kind of hold that a little bit. Thank you.